Good evening. My name is Christopher Trin, and welcome to the Civil Channel News Center here at Boston, Massachusetts. Tonight, we present to you a decade in review. As you probably have heard, California, which was not yet admitted a state before 1850, raised issues within Congress about whether or not it should become a slave state or a free state. Senator Henry Clay is seeking compromise, and with the experience of creating the Missouri Compromise back in the year 1820, he crafted the Compromise of 1850. This compromise promised the North that California would be admitted as a free state, and that the slave trade in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, would be abolished. To please the South, the compromise promised not to pass laws regarding slavery for any territory won from Mexico. And in addition, Congress had passed a stronger law to help slaveholders recapture runaway slaves. Many people were torn over this compromise, believing that we and the South should not sacrifice so much. Eventually, it was passed in the end, and this led to more conflict in the states about slavery and the Fugitive Slave Act of 1805, which was later passed as part of the compromise. Our city and others in the North was flooded with signs and posters. Here's a look back at a poster posted in Boston. Caution. Colored people of Boston, one and all, you are hereby respectfully cautioned and advised to avoid conversing with the watchmen and police officers of Boston. For since the recent order of the mayor and aldermen, they are empowered to set as kidnappers and slave catchers, and they have already been actually employed to kidnapping, catching, and keeping slaves. Therefore, if you value your liberty and the welfare of the fugitives among you, shun them in every possible manner. And as so many hounds on the track of the most unfortunate of your race, keep a sharp lookout for kidnappers and have top eye open. April 24, 1853. We knew this all too well, making sure to always keep a lookout for runaways, even though we would rather not. But punishments were given out to those who did not obey the act. An arrest warrant was not needed, and the slave did not receive a jury trial. Some blacks ended up being innocently arrested. Such a terrible, terrible mistake we have made. National commissioners that ruled each case received $5 to free people and $10 to send them back. Now, let's go back 4 years when Stephen A. Douglas, the Senator of Illinois, drafted a bill to organize lands in the Nebraska Territory. This bill proposed that it would be divided into two territories, Nebraska and Kansas. In order for the South to support the bill, Douglas suggested that prohibiting slavery in that territories be decided by popular sovereignty. The people now had the ability to voice their opinions by voting. Abolitionists and pro-slavery settlers, many of whom came from cities and towns here in the North, rushed into the territory to vote. As a result of the bill being passed, the Missouri Compromise was strayed by allowing citizens to vote for slavery in territories where the Missouri Compromise had banned it. Many settlers applauded and supported what soon became known as the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Once the election came in March of 1855, pro-slavery settlers outnumbered anti-slavery settlers, and the official Kansas legislature was packed with pro-slavery representatives. 2 months later, on May 21, 1856, a pro-slavery mob attacked the town of Lawrence, Kansas, and destroyed various offices and buildings. This attack soon became known as the Sack of Lawrence. John Brown, an extreme abolitionist originally from Connecticut, avenged the Sack of Lawrence by killing 5 people who were pro-slavery. This became known as the Potawatomi Massacre. Take a look at the short interview clip from fellow news anchor Olivia McDonald, conducted with John Brown after his attack.
What was your motivation behind the Sack of Lawrence?
I always had a deep determination and passion to end slavery. The ways slaves are treated and how they are made to work for free disgusts me. Their fear never ends as they are whipped, left scrounging for anything to eat, and not paid 1 cent for their labor. I regret nothing in my actions in Lawrence.
Civil War then broke out in Kansas, where it continued for 3 years. During this time, Kansas became known as Bleeding Kansas. Now, on to the mid-1800s. Dred Scott had been a slave living in Missouri. Throughout his time as a slave, his owner took him to many places, most of which were where slavery was illegal. He was then taken back to Missouri, where his owner later died. The wife had been rented him out to an army doctor. Unable to take the cruelty compared to his relatively docile master, Scott sued for his freedom. Since he had lived in territories where slavery was illegal, he should have been a free man. The case of Dred Scott versus Sanford finally reached the Supreme Court on March 6, 1857. The ruling was decided 1 year later, but the court ruled against Scott. Chief Justice Roger B. Taney states that since Dred Scott was black, he was not a U.S. citizen. Thus, he could not sue in U.S. courts. He also ruled that since he currently lived in Missouri, Scott was bound by Missouri's slave code, so his time in free territory didn't matter. In the light of this ruling, Taney also argued that Congress should not have banned slavery in any territory. Since slaves were considered property, doing so violated the slaveholders' property rights. And also due to this ruling, Taney declared legislation such as the Missouri Compromise unconstitutional, which banned slavery above the Missouri line. Although Southerners cleared this court's decision, This news came outrageous to many of us and caused splits in many political parties, convinced that slavery was bound to expand no matter what. However, the Republican Party had a new candidate in mind for upcoming election, Senator and President, Illinois lawyer Abraham Lincoln. Let's take it over to Olivia for the continuing events in our decade in review.
Thank you, Chris. Hasn't it been a long decade?
It sure has, Olivia, but the review events aren't quite over yet. What was the highlight of the decade for you?
Lincoln's House Divided speech. It will never be possible for that to fade from the history books.
I agree. Let's take a look at the clip of the speech.
Definitely.
A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. Either the opponents of slavery will arrest its further spread and place it where the public mind shall rest in the belief that it is on a course of ultimate extinction, or its advocates shall press it forward until it shall become alike lawful in all of the states, old as well as new, north as well as south.
October 15, 1858 is a day to be remembered. We were there live in Alton, Illinois, at the scene of the final debate between Republican lawyer Abraham Lincoln and U.S. Senator Stephen A. Douglas. They had been traveling to and from 7 locations throughout Illinois, throughout approximately the past 2 months, debating over the seat for U.S. Senator. Here's a summary of the arguments. Lincoln. He believed that we, the people, should not be given the power to vote for slavery. He referred to the Dred Scott case, whose main points were that Scott was not a citizen because he was black. Non-citizens are not able to sue. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 was said to be unconstitutional because it banned slavery above the Missouri line. Under the Fifth Amendment, slavery could not be banned because the freedoms to property would be lost. In his speech, Lincoln said that the country should not be divided, with half of the area having slaves and half of the area being free without slaves. Lincoln was deeply rooted in the idea that slavery should not be kept, believing that it was wrong and that whatever decision was made by the country, the issue of slavery should not be divided among the areas in the country. Lincoln believed that blacks were also entitled to what the Declaration of Independence brought. This included rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Douglas. Stephen Douglas was for the idea of popular sovereignty, which allowed the citizens to vote for the idea of slavery, which would allow or abolish it. According to the Freeport Doctrine, Douglas expressed that the Supreme Court should not have the final say in abolishing or allowing slavery because he noted it should be up to the people. He believed that each state should be independent of the country and have its own say if it should have slavery or not. He made it clear that the blacks were not equal to whites and that the founders of the United States did not want blacks to be equal as well. Neither Lincoln or Douglas won the popular votes. According to the new Senate laws, we needed to vote for legislators locally, who would vote for the senator. Douglas and the Democrats won the majority votes in this election, but it was not too late for Lincoln to gain some kind of victory, especially after we became familiar with Lincoln here in the North. October 16, 1859, abolitionist and frightening strongman who put his life at stake against slavery, John Brown attacked Harper's Ferry Armory in Virginia. Earlier in his life, Brown was involved in the Underground Railroad, which smuggled slaves to the free states, and he also moved to Kansas for the cause. In addition, he killed 5 men for the same determination of the abolition of slavery. He had this motivation for political rebellion and violence, which all broke out at Harper's Ferry. His army consisted of 21 men, 5 of whom were black. Brown tried to convince Frederick Douglass to be on his side, without success. In 36 hours of the attack, the majority of Brown's army was killed or captured. John's army included his sons, and in the battle, 2 were killed. General Robert E. Lee helped to arrest Brown. November 2nd, 1859. The jury of Charlestown, Virginia, declared Brown guilty of treason, murder, and stirring up a slave uprising against authority. Brown gave his final speech to convince the jury that he should obtain life in prison, not the death penalty. It only took 45 minutes for Brown to be pronounced guilty. This speech conveyed that John Brown was a stubborn person, but he was also passionate and determined about ending slavery. Since he was an abolitionist, in his speech before the death sentence, he said that he wanted slaves to be free and have their own liberties, which led the raid. The audience at the time was the jury, and he gave more emphasis because he was just about to be put on the death sentence. At this moment, he could have been making up any story that could help him not to be put to death. December 2nd, 1859, John Brown received the death penalty and was hanged. Decade in Review on Civil Channel News at 5 will continue after this unique antique message. Do you want to bring light to your world at this time of conflict in the United States? Are you trying to keep a journal of historical events, but writing in the darkness? Then Hansen's Corn Oil is the right choice for you. Located at 85 Union Street in Boston, Massachusetts, H.P. Hansen and Company supplies the best oil for your kerosene lamp. For just half a cent an hour, it is a portable, odorless, smokeless, tranquilizing, inexpensive, and safe way to light up your life. Get the best, Hansen's Corn Oil. Last but not least, our final decade in review story. Abraham Lincoln versus Stephen A. Douglas in the North, Breckinridge versus Bell in the South. Your votes came in, and the winner, the 16th President of the United States, became Republican Abraham Lincoln. This was a win for us in the North. The weakening of slavery can now be seen in the distance. We endured a long political road of Lincoln winning in the North, and Breckinridge winning in the South, who was for protecting slavery in any territory. When Lincoln pledged to not abolish slavery, to stop states from seceding, and the South did not believe him, thinking they had states' rights, we thought we were in for the worst. We thought that the secession was for the people of the South was unconstitutional. President Buchanan said that the national government was at the top of the rankings with power, and the states were below, so they had no right to secede from the Union. If they did secede, the nation would fall apart and weaken. Buchanan said that the Constitution of the United States protected against the secession and the weakening of power. We Northerners thought that the South did not like democracy, the government type where the people rule, because they were not satisfied with the election. The South believed in states' rights, majority rules, and the protection of slavery under their Confederate Constitution. Where history will lead us, nobody knows. Thank you for tuning in to Civil Channel News at 5.
Tune in a decade more for our next Decade in Review.
See you at 10 to bring you to the nightly broadcast.